Breaking news, y'all. Grab your popcorn because this one is about to get ugly. Picture this. The rap game's cool-headed king of timeless bars, the man who gave us Illmatic, just got dragged into the mud by none other than Harlem's own professional. Chaos starter, Jim Jones. And Nas? Oh, he's not staying quiet this time. Or is he? That's the million-dollar question. Did Nas finally break his silence and clap back? Or did he just drop one of those legendary cold-blooded subliminals that can end a man's career without even saying his name? Because let's be real, this isn't just a rap beef, this is a culture war. Legacy versus clout, substance versus noise, poetry versus reality TV energy. And the streets? Oh, they're eating it up. Social media is already calling this the biggest rap scandal since Kanye tried to convince us slavery was a choice. But here's the kicker. There's a lot more bubbling under the surface than just a couple of interviews and some half-baked bravado. I'm talking secret recordings, shady industry whispers, and the kind of receipts that make you want to throw your phone across the room. So buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you might just flip everything you thought you knew about Nas, Jim Jones, and the state of hip-hop in 2025. So let's get right into it, because this story does not start with Jim Jones waking up one morning and deciding to disrespect Nas for no reason. No. This mess has roots that go all the way back to the mid-2000s, when Dipset was riding high and Harlem energy was everywhere. And Jim was already dipping his toes into controversy every time he opened his mouth. But fast forward to now, and the man has somehow convinced himself that going head-to-head with Nasir Jones, the Illmatic King, the God's son himself, is a good idea. Like, seriously, who advises this man? Because if you thought the internet was going to let Jim rewrite hip-hop history and crown himself more relevant than Nas, you must be living in an alternate universe. Yet here we are, Jim Jones jumping on podcasts and declaring with his whole chest that his catalog, his so-called Billboard hits, and his influence with the younger generation put him above Nas. And the wildest part is he really seemed to believe it. Now picture this. Jim sitting across from Joe and Jada on their podcast, leaning back with his Harlem bravado, saying his son cannot even name a single Nas record, like that was supposed to be some kind of cultural mic drop. But instead it just exposed how detached he is from the actual legacy of hip-hop, because the internet instantly went nuclear, dragging him through the mud, memes flying everywhere, fans dusting off their old copies of Illmatic and Stillmatic just to clown him harder, the narrative spinning so fast that Jim probably wished he had stayed home that day. But no, he doubled down, telling Shannon Sharpe with a straight face that he could run circles around Nas rapping right now. Which is wild considering that Nas has been winning Grammys, dropping acclaimed albums with Hit Boy, and selling out arenas while Jim has been busy making Instagram skits and popping up on podcasts. And here's the thing. The scandal is not just about one man talking reckless. It is about how hip-hop culture reacts when someone disrespects a legend, because the generational divide instantly split the internet in half. Younger fans who never grew up with Nas in real time suddenly nodding their heads like maybe Jim had. A point, while older fans and hip-hop purists launched into full attack mode, ready to defend Nas's legacy like it was a sacred temple. And into this firestorm drops another layer of chaos. An old clip from the Don't Quote Me podcast where a 22-year-old college student claimed Jim Jones had more influence on his generation than Nas. And once that resurfaced, it poured gasoline on the flames, because suddenly it was not just Jim hyping himself, it was kids on the timeline declaring they never heard Nas at a party. They only knew him from NBA 2K soundtracks, and they would rather throw on Pop Champagne than If I Ruled the World. And that right there was the spark that reignited this whole legacy versus clout debate, one that has been simmering under the surface since the days Nas ethered Jay-Z. Because back then, Jim was already caught up in the smoke riding with Dipset and Rockefeller, throwing shade whenever he got a chance, calling Nas washed and saying he lost his pizzazz, and Nas, in classic Nas fashion, never really responded. He just brushed it off with that smooth demeanor like who even is Jim Jones, letting his silence say more than 1,000 disses. And that is the difference between the two. Jim thrives on noise, chaos, and attention, while Nas thrives on letting the music speak and elevating the conversation. But the scandal now is that Jim has tried to drag Nas down into the mud once again. Only this time the stakes are different because we are in the era of viral clips, algorithm-fueled outrage, and legacy debates going viral on TikTok in 30 seconds or less. So when Jim made his bold claims, it was not just Harlem barbershops debating. It was the entire internet watching, screenshotting, and cooking him in real time. And what makes it more scandalous is the whispers behind the scenes, because according to some anonymous industry chatter, Jim has been feeling salty for years. That Dipset never got the flowers they thought they deserved. Seeing Nas still treated like royalty eats at him, so stirring controversy becomes his way of forcing the conversation. But here is the catch. When you poke a giant, you better be ready for the blowback, and right now Nas is letting his silence do the talking. But the streets are buzzing that a new EP full of slick subliminals might be on the way. And if that happens, Jim will be remembered as the man who accidentally woke up a sleeping legend. Which makes you wonder if this was all a calculated play for clout, or just another case of Jim running his mouth and getting caught in the storm. Either way, the scandal has exploded beyond anything he probably imagined. What makes the scandal even more outrageous is how the so-called receipts started flooding in. Because once Jim made those bold claims, the internet did what the internet always does. It began digging, unearthing old clips, pulling up stats, and creating a fake investigative frenzy that felt bigger than a presidential scandal. And suddenly you had anonymous insiders sliding into DMs, claiming they had seen text messages where Jim allegedly bragged about staging the whole controversy just to get podcast bookings. Because let's be real, he has been on more podcasts in the last year than he has had radio spins, and that right there paints a picture of a man desperate to stay relevant. Now here's where it gets even messier. Because rumors started flying that Jim had been throwing money at influencers to amplify his narrative, supposedly paying TikTok creators to post hot takes like Jim Jones is more influential than Nas, and Illmatic is overrated, which, of course, triggered another round of cultural outrage as fans accused him of trying to rewrite hip-hop history with cash instead of talent. And one fake leaked document even claimed Jim dropped over 100 grand into this campaign. Money that fans speculated might not even be his, since people have long whispered about questionable business dealings keeping his lifestyle afloat. The fake reports painted him as a man juggling credit card scams, phantom real estate projects, and shady promoter deals, all while screaming that he is a cultural icon. And while none of this has been proven, the narrative stuck because it fit the picture of Jim as a hustler who blurs the line between ambition and desperation. Meanwhile, anonymous producers began whispering that Nas had quietly recorded verses addressing the situation. Not direct dissies, but those surgical subliminals that cut deep without naming names. And one insider even described a verse where Nas supposedly raps about clowns chasing relevance on podcasts while kings chase timelessness. And fans instantly connected the dots, convincing themselves it had to be about Jim, fueling the idea that Nas's silence was not weakness but strategy. And that contrast only made Jim look more chaotic. Because while Nas moved like a chess, Master Jim was running around like a man addicted to noise, chasing any camera that would give him a mic. The public reactions to all of this were wild. You had OGs like Fat Joe and Busta Rhymes laughing on Instagram Live, saying nobody with a Dipset chain should be talking down on Nas. You had Twitter threads, 20 posts long, breaking down Nas's lyrics versus Jim's lyrics. And the difference was embarrassing. People comparing If I Ruled the World to Pop Champagne, like it was a fair fight. You had TikTok skits mocking Jim, where kids would pretend to be him saying, I run circles around Nas, while tripping over their own feet. And through it all, Jim just kept talking, insisting he was not backing down. But every word only made the backlash stronger. And here is where the supposed investigative dirt got spicier. Because one anonymous source claimed that Jim had been offered a brand deal that fell through after he insulted Nas, the company allegedly afraid of being caught on the wrong side of history, and that supposed loss of income became another talking point as fans argued that clout chasing has real costs, that trying to go viral at the expense of a legend can backfire in the bank account too. And then came the whispers of legal drama, because some fake leaked audio circulated online where a voice that sounded suspiciously like Jim was heard admitting to backroom payola schemes, boasting about greasing DJs to spin his records back in the day, and whether the tape was real or not did not matter because the public believed it, creating an image of Jim as someone who built his so-called catalog on pay-for-play rather than true influence, which made his shots at Nas look even weaker. And fans were eating it up, spreading conspiracy threads about how Jim's entire legacy might crumble under the weight of receipts yet to come. While on the flip side, Nas was seen courtside at basketball games, smiling, relaxed, clearly unbothered, as if to say, I do not need to argue my place. I already am the culture. And that split-screen moment defined the scandal perfectly. Jim sweating in interviews defending himself while Nas floated above the noise, untouchable. And the question hanging over all of this was, how far will Jim push it? Because every time it seemed like the dust was settling, he would pop back up with another outrageous claim. One week saying he runs circles around Nas. The next claiming Nas has no influence with the youth. And then even doubling down by claiming Dipset shaped fashion more than Nas ever did, which only gave fans more ammo to clown him with side-by-side photos, turning him into a walking meme. The scandal snowballed into something bigger than music. It became about respect, history, and the danger of trying to erase legacies for clicks. And as the rumors and fake receipts piled up, the suspense only grew. Everyone waiting for Nas to finally say something, to drop a bar, a verse, a cryptic Instagram caption, anything. But instead, he let the internet fight his battle. And that choice only made the anticipation heavier. Because when legends choose silence, the world listens even harder, wondering when the storm will finally break. As the scandal stretched further, it became clear this was no longer just a back and forth between two rappers, but a full-scale cultural spectacle that people could not look away from. And with every passing day, new layers of chaos were added like fuel on a fire that refused to die down, because suddenly blogs began reporting that record labels were quietly monitoring the situation, worried that the controversy might spill into their own artists' promotional campaigns. Whispers began that executives were advising their younger acts not to take sides publicly for fear of alienating entire segments of the hip-hop community. Yet some still could not resist. A handful of rising rappers jumped online to co-sign Jim's narrative, saying things like Nas is old school and does not resonate with this generation. But the backlash was immediate and brutal. Fans flooded their comment sections with clown emojis and lengthy dissertations about Illmatic. And before long, some of those same rappers were backpedaling with half-hearted apologies, insisting they were misquoted or taken out of context, which only made the circus even louder. And while that was happening, more fake reports started leaking about how Jim's own finances were under stress. One alleged bank statement floated around claiming his accounts were being watched for suspicious activity tied to promoter scams and phantom shows. And although nobody could verify if the documents were real, the timing was enough to convince the public that karma was coming fast. The image of Jim Jones as a hustler scraping for clout began to solidify in the collective imagination, while Nas, by contrast, looked untouchable, still moving with grace, still attending industry events, dressed sharp and calm as though the scandal did not even reach his radar. And that juxtaposition became a storyline in itself. Late-night shows making jokes about how Jim was out here, screaming into microphones while Nas was sipping wine on balconies writing timeless verses. And then the fake investigative angle turned darker with rumors of government probes. Some online threads insisted that state tax authorities were sniffing around Jim's business deals, allegedly curious about discrepancies in his reported earnings versus his flashy lifestyle. Suddenly, conspiracy theories popped up that maybe his sudden loudness against Nas was a smokescreen, a distraction tactic to keep people from looking too closely at his books. And whether true or not, it made for gripping content. YouTube channels dropped hour-long exposés dissecting every rumor. Podcast hosts speculated about possible indictments. And social media had a field day imagining Jim Jones in court still insisting he could run circles around Nas while prosecutors presented receipts. The scandal was no longer confined to music. It had spilled into the realm of spectacle entertainment, where perception is reality, and perception was eating Jim alive. Meanwhile, fans began pushing a narrative that Nas was preparing the ultimate silent checkmate, a rumored EP dubbed Legacy Talk. Supposedly packed with bars aimed at dismantling clout chasers without ever naming them, insiders claimed snippets existed where Nas spoke on the culture-confusing noise with greatness, where he warned younger rappers not to fall for the trap of disrespecting pioneers. And the anticipation of that project made fans even more convinced that Jim had poked a giant. Because if Nas did decide to release even one verse aimed in his direction, the internet would explode and the debate would be over instantly. Yet the silence continued. A silence that became louder than any diss track, and that silence drove Jim to push harder, granting interviews where he repeated the same claims like a broken record, yet each time sounding more desperate than confident. And fans noticed. The memes shifted from mocking him to pitying him, portraying him as a man trapped in his own performance, unable to back down because to admit defeat would mean erasing months of loud talk. So he doubled and tripled down, dragging Dipset history into the conversation, dragging New York street culture into it, even dragging fashion history into it, claiming his era set trends Nas could never match. But none of it landed the way he wanted. Instead, it only highlighted the hollowness of his arguments. Because while Nas has decades of lyrical brilliance, cultural influence, and awards, Jim was leaning on podcast sound bites and debatable style moments, and the people were not buying it. By now, the fallout was unavoidable, sponsors quietly distancing themselves, industry peers giving polite but cold responses, and the public overwhelmingly siding with Nas as the legend who chose not to wrestle in the mud. And what this revealed was bigger than just two artists. It revealed a generational clash, a desperation among some to stay relevant by tearing down legends, and a reminder that real legacy cannot be undone by cheap shots. The suspense now was not about whether Nas would respond, but about how long Jim could keep pretending the backlash was not crushing him. How long he could keep manufacturing noise before the weight of silence buried him. And that is where things stood. One man fighting for clout with every ounce of noise he could produce. The other sitting back letting decades of artistry do the talking, and the entire culture watching like it was the season finale of a drama they never knew they needed but could not stop binging. So now that the smoke has cleared and you've seen how this circus unfolded, the real question is, what do you think? Because this is bigger than Jim Jones trying to claw his way into headlines, and bigger than Nas sitting back like a chess master letting the game argue on his behalf. This is about how we as a culture choose to handle legacy versus clout. Do we reward the loudest voice in the room, or do we honor the one whose work still shakes the foundation decades later? And here is where you come in, because I want to hear from you. If you were in Nas's position, would you stay silent and let the music speak? Or would you drop the hammer with a savage diss track that ends the debate forever? And if you were Jim Jones, would you keep pushing even as the internet roasted you, or would you tap out gracefully before the damage goes too far? Drop your answers in the comments, let me know your hottest takes. And while you are at it, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this saga is far from over, and you do not want to miss the next chapter.